Hi again. I woke up this morning with a horrendous migraine. That was great. But the day definitely made up for it, which is good. And because it's Saturday night and I'm sitting here talking to you about 3D printing, I think I've earned myself a glass of champagne. So I'm going to talk you through again some of the things that really stood out to me. And if you hear like cricket sounds in the background, for some reason there are a lot of cicadas being very, very loud tonight. A cicada is like an Australian version of a cricket, I guess. It's like the sound of summer, but it's really not summer. It's terrible weather. So I'm not really sure why they've decided to come out and have a party. But if you hear it, that's what it is. All right, let's get started. Get my trusty laptop. And I need the paper as well. I didn't film very much B-roll because ultimately dental conferences are dental conferences and they don't really visually change that much from day to day. But what does change is the information that is distilled upon those who attend. So first off, we had Terry Whitty again, and he was talking about how accurate your printer is. So what did I find interesting about that talk? He was talking about just nitty-gritty stuff, and ultimately accuracy is something that has been tested in research, but I do think there's a lot more to come in the future. Accuracy of reproduction is, yes, the printer in part, but also obviously the intraoral scanner or the medium by which you're collecting that impression. He was saying, good tip, if you're printing really large objects and you're finding that it's failing, putting down a mesh on the base platform, on the platform before you start printing is really useful to then have the supports almost supported because they're all interlocked by that rather than going straight as just like one cylinder off the build platform. You then have a honeycomb network that's holding all of them together. So that was interesting. There are some new resins coming out in the future that are like water soluble, which means you won't need to use alcohol as much because water will just clean them up for you. And there is definitely a push for some plant-based resins because at the end of the day, as I described yesterday, dentistry is an incredibly wasteful profession, arguably necessary based on the materials that we have at the moment to keep hygiene standards and safety standards very high. But it is a big thing that we as a profession need to tackle. He had a good tip as well. At the end, after you've done all your washing, all your curing, if you still have a little bit of that stickiness, use some dish soap. So Palmolive soap is a very common brand in Australia. He was saying he literally just cleans it up with that. So that was really handy. Talk number 2 was actually awesome. They were all awesome, but talk number 2 is really, really cool because it was 2 girls. I feel like I always call adult women girls. I don't know, I just feel like it's weird calling people my age. These 2 women just came up and talked about their research project. They were doing their honours in dental technology and they'd done research. And they're from New Zealand, from the dental university there called Otago in Dunedin, which is in the South Island. His geography. Zai was talking about her research project, which was about the effects of prolonged post-washing in ethanol. So manufacturers obviously will normally recommend and have tested specific solutions to be able to clean and post-process any prints that you have. And she was researching to see what happens if you wash a 3D printed crown with porcelain material according to the manufacturer's recommendations and best practice, or if you leave it in there for an hour to sort of essentially to try and simulate if you were like, oh, well, I'll come back to that after lunch. And she did it for 8 hours as well to see, right, if I leave it sitting in the ethanol for 8 hours, like when you do at the end of the day, when you think, oh, I'll come back to that tomorrow morning, what impact would that have to the surface? Would it cause an impact and a change to the bond strength? And would there be degradation? And it was pretty interesting. There were not a lot of studies to sort of base it off. So I think there was 6 studies in total on all the databases she checked that she could find. And it was pretty limited systematic review to be able to work off. She was saying that a lot of the manufacturers would recommend that when you print them, you print the crowns on a 45-degree angle because obviously you're layering as you go, and it allows when you cure for the light of the curing light to permeate a lot more down through the 3D printed crown, which is really useful because it means that your depth of cure is far greater than something that is milled, for example, because of the structure and organization of the crystalline structures within that. So it means that areas that have thicker regions because of cuspal thickness, etc., you're going to get a good depth of cure, which is really nice. Pretty much what she found was that there was a decrease in all materials if you left them in there for more than the recommended amount, so 10 minutes. It was more significant in ethanol would degrade the surface texture and roughness, so it would make it sort of this just like shitty, not grippy surface anymore. And so it did definitely impact your ability to have a good bond strength there. It was interesting seeing it under the spectrum I don't remember how to. It was interesting to see it under the electrospectrum magnification microscope thing, imaging thing, where it's like really close up grey, black and white pictures, and you could definitely see the difference. It was pretty wild. I'm going to link her article down below so you can check it out because it was very interesting. Pretty much the takeaway of it was that you should follow the instructions that the manufacturer is telling you, which seems to be pretty much a running theme throughout this course. Read the goddamn instructions. Hey, I'm guilty. I have also at times, actually, alright, I'm not proud of this, but I went up today to the Accuretta sales guy because we have an Accuretta washer and there's like this little symbol of dots. I will insert a picture. And I thought it was Braille. Like, it looks like Braille, which is, I just didn't understand what the different dots meant. And so I asked him, hey, do you reckon you could explain would you mind explaining to me what the different settings are on this and how to make the most out of this washer? And he was like, oh yeah, sure. Took me through the whole process and was explaining that you can put the build plate in the actual washer to help clean the build plate at the same time to try and avoid dripping before you break the model off, before you separate the model off the build plate. And he was like, oh yeah, sure, no problems. Talks me through it all. And I still didn't have an answer to what do the dots mean? And so I had to ask him, thank you so much. But I was just wondering if you could explain to me what the dots on that button mean. And he was like, okay, so the first dot that lights up means that the one on the left will work. If you press it again, it moves it down and it means the one on the right will work. And then if you press it one more time, it means that both will work. And so the dots just corresponded on which side of the washer was on. And I felt like the world's most technologically challenged individual. I was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna walk away now because I look like an idiot. But I know now, so there is no such thing as a dumb question, just dumb people. Then the second presentation was from a lovely girl/lady. Her name was Samantha, and she was also from Otago University. And she was talking about the influences that heat and pressure has on dimensional accuracy of 3D printed models. Again, very limited research around it. Most of the research that was around... Oh god, what the hell was happening out there? Okay, so I live in an area where sound travels a lot up from a park. And it's a big park. And sometimes you just hear like these random things and it sounds like somebody's like being attacked, or it's a really nice area as well. So it's not like people get stabbed in the park, but sometimes you just hear some weird shit. Yeah, so she was saying that 3 main ways that you can print models that are considered accurate. Number 1 is the solid, which is the most accurate. Number 2 is a honeycomb matrix inside the model. So it's hollow, but you're still reinforcing it internally. And then the least accurate is hollow, but it depends on the wall thickness as well. The main research has been based on purely either solid models or hollow models with varying wall thicknesses. What they found was that particularly hollow models, they are not very dimensionally stable, especially around areas like the palate when it is... What they found was that solid was pretty dimensionally stable in majority of the surfaces within the mouth. The honeycomb was also pretty good, but the hollow model tend to have a lot of issues with the palatal areas, in particular with changing, because you have layers that are sort of spread further apart. It's not like a tooth where you're stacking very closely on top of each other to be able to create that curvature. And so for that reason, they tend to sort of flatten out and compress together more under the heat. And you would obviously have further changes because of that. So, moral of the story is don't be a stingy bitch and use more resin to print solid models. Or honeycomb also apparently works really well. I sat down with the girls for lunch actually, and they were so nice. I'd never really thought about the degree of dental technology before, to be honest, because it's not a really common degree in Australia. And they were saying in Otago, there's only 25 positions. So typically, they're very, very sought after. And I think in Australia, they were saying that the only place that has it is Griffith. Not sure if anywhere else does. I know that TAFE, which is like a trade school essentially, I can't think of a vocational training school. They have lab courses, but it's not like a bachelor degree in dental technology, which I think makes sense because it's such a niche area and it's changing so much and you need to understand materials to a fairly high degree a lot of the time. So that was quite interesting. And they were so nice. They came over from New Zealand and it was like the second ever dental conference they'd been to. And they were like, wow, this is a really nice conference. Is it normally like this? And I was like, depends. Really depends. I liked it because I feel like the service staff had a really detail to attention. The whole experience, there was a lot of detail, which I appreciate. Like, for example, your jug of water was never empty. You would go out for morning tea, you'd come back, and there was no little mint wrappers. They were all removed. And they were heading up to Queensland afterwards, to the Sunshine Coast. No, the Gold Coast, to have a sunny Australian experience. Because they were like, we have spent way too much money in Sydney. And I was agreeing with them that yes, Sydney is very, very expensive. So after that, we had a lovely guy from Melbourne. I'm going to totally butcher pronouncing his name. Joran. He's like one of those Scandinavian North individuals, I'm going to assume. He's a really nice guy. He was talking about facially driven digital dentistry in 3D printing, using 3D printing. He went through a lot of different sort of software and hardware options like face scans, RayFace, whatever it's called. And then the Shining's new MediSmile. There's a bunch of different ones that have been released over time and the pros and cons around those and digitization. I'll be honest, I don't use face scanners. I do see the merits of them. I definitely think it would be useful. They are expensive though. And I don't find that it significantly impacts the outcomes of the work that I do use, but I think it would be very helpful in cases where you have people who are not always as experienced at translating 2D to 3D, because something like SmileCloud, again, I always come back to SmileCloud. He also loves SmileCloud. I had a really good chat to him at the end about it. He's a KOL for them. So we were talking about it and he was saying that he loves the 2D in SmileCloud because you can really translate it well, but a lot of 2D dental sort of planning tools to show patients what they look like, they're not indicative of what you're actually going to end up with. It's like, yes, you can make it look amazing. You've just cut the teeth out and put a whole new set there, and biologically it's not going to be physically possible. So you're already setting yourself up to fail because you've shown somebody something that you cannot deliver. And so I do think that RayFace is helpful to be able to articulate things, get everything in the right position. It's more data collation, and more data you have, the better, because ultimately 2D images are going to distort. Even if you have the best lens in the world, there is some level of compression taking a 3D object and turning it into 2D. But I feel like I have enough understanding of how it translates in the mouth in terms of being able to how to preempt what it will actually look like in photos in the mouth compared to if I was to purely just when I'm trying to take that 2D and make the 3D look like the 2D in the mouth. There's a little bit of an art form to it, and it does take practice. He had an amazing trick where he was saying with your mock-ups, when you 3D printed them, because you're like making such a crisp and precise putty key, you'll get little striations of the 3D printing, like topographic map almost, coming up on the surfaces of the teeth. And particularly when you're using beautiful natural files. I know I go on about natural files all the time. I love them. They're so beautiful. Particularly when you're using natural files, what you will find is that you'll get those little striations when you look close up. What you can do before you make the putty key is paint a very, very thin coat of OptiGlaze by GC over the top, cure it, and that will help to create a really beautiful smooth surface that you then make your putty key on. So that when you use your Luxatemp or Bisacryl or whatever you decide, it will be perfection. And we love perfection. So that was really, really cool. I'll put, again, his links down the bottom because he does run different courses. He does a lot of design stuff. Yeah, nice guy. Very willing to help. And he has a lab down in Melbourne. And a lot of people, even labs, will outsource to certain labs to have things designed. And he's like one of those labs. He was also talking about you should really have different buckets for different materials when you're cleaning them because they're different schedules. They're different categories in terms of the resin components. So like you probably don't want to be mixing something that's a resin with like a porcelain resin hybrid because especially if you're going to be bonding on that porcelain crown printed material and you've sullied it with like some model material, that's going to impact your ultimate outcome. Another really good tip is when you're cleaning like Ceramco or a porcelain crown printing resin material, don't use alcohol on those materials to clean it because that's how you get that like frosty matte weird outside. You can use something like Resin Away, which will help to achieve a really nice finish. It's not going to be weird because the alcohol messes with the resin component I think he was saying as well the photo initiators of the alcohol messes with the resin component of that specific material. And so that is why you end up with that layer that you then try and fix with like polishing or with OptiGlaze, which is not what the OptiGlaze is TGA approved to do. So interesting. Just realized I put my notes completely, it's really random. I started in one template and then all of a sudden I've decided, oh no, I'm going to start writing my notes from day 2 and day 1. So that's not confusing at all. All right, and then we had lecture number 4, which was the verification and validation aspects of personalized medical device by our good friend, Dr. Chumoli from the TGA. And the poor guy got absolutely hammered again by the audience.